So why won't a pool pump prime? Now there's many ways to diagnose, but in this episode, I'm going to be discussing some of the things that I personally look at whenever I come across a pool pump that just isn't priming. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, in order to even begin to diagnose why a pool pump isn't priming, I think we need to understand the basic components of a pool pump and how it operates, right? So for those of you that are new to the pool industry, or if you're a new pool owner and you're just starting to learn your own pool equipment, I'm going to try to explain this as simply as I can. So a pool pump consists of two major components, and it's in halves. The front half is usually your wet end or your pump strainer end. And this has all the components inside there that when they're working together, it's sucking in water and then pushing it back out through this front half or the wet end. The back half of a pool pump is the motor, right? This is the part that attaches to the front wet end components, so that as the motor's spinning, that's what's allowing a pool to draw in water and to push it out so that it can effectively produce water flow. You know, that's just a pool pump in a nutshell. Okay, now that we kind of understand a little bit more or less the basics of a pool pump, we can start to diagnose or figure out what would be causing a pool pump not to prime. Okay, now in my experience, I'd say 90% of the time, pool pumps that aren't priming are not priming because of a suction leak or an air leak. Okay, and you would typically find these on the suction side of your pool pump or on the front of the pump. So, and it doesn't take much of a suction leak or air leak to not allow a pump to prime. All right, it can be a tiny little pinhole leak, and just that small amount of an air leak would cause a pool pump not to prime. It's something that's just small of a pinhole leak that would just be just very, very annoying to try to find. So, but at least, you know, with the basic understanding of how a pool pump works, now we can kind of start to more or less figure out what could be causing this issue, right? So when I ever come across a pool pump that's not priming, one of the first things I'm looking to see is if there's enough water, first of all, in your pool or the spa. Right? Are the water levels where they're supposed to be? Is everything filled up to where it's supposed to be? The reason why I ask this is because a pool pump relies heavily on proper water levels, right? A lot of components are installed in a manner that the water levels got to be filled properly. And if the water's not where it's supposed to be, then your pool pump can get into situations where it's starting to suck in air because there isn't enough water being introduced into the plumbing system for it to even achieve a prime. So if that's one of the first things I ask, you know, and if that's covered and if the water is filled to where it's supposed to be filled, the next thing I like to ask is if your filter's been cleaned or serviced. Do you know when the last time it was serviced? And why I ask this is because I've been in situations where, and just to backtrack a little bit, the next thing in line after a pool pump is a filter, right? So as you're sucking in water and pumping it out of a pool pump, it goes through a filter first before it goes anywhere else. So that this is how a filtration system works. Now, since a filter is after a pool pump, and that filter just so happens to be dirty, you create what you call restrictions, right? Or clogs. You know, there's different terminologies. So the reason why I ask if anybody knows the last time a filter's been serviced is because, like I said, I've been in situations where I've come across just an extremely, extremely dirty clogged filter to the point that it was so bad, it wasn't letting the pump prime the way it's supposed to. Because what was happening was the pump, when it turned on, it was trying to draw in, a certain amount of water at a certain flow rate, but it just was not able to push that back out at a nice flow rate because the filter was so clogged. It was creating a very, very intense restriction. So it wasn't able to, pull in that amount of water and push it back out evenly. It was just like a clog. That was not allowing the pump to prime. So in that situation, all I had to do was tear open that filter, clean it up, put it back together, and when I fired it back up, man, that pump primed right up. So that's why I ask about that. That's another basic item that you can look at. Now, there's also a couple of other components that could potentially cause restrictions that you could ask also when the last time those components were serviced. For example, salt systems or salt cells. These components are after the filter, right? And again, if you're new to pools or you're a new pool owner, you're just learning about your pool equipment, a salt cell gets plumbed in line, right? So I'm going to pull up a diagram here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. And again, for the listeners out there that are not behind a screen, I'm going to try to explain this as simple as I can. So here's the diagram right here. This is just a traditional pool and spa combination layout where your pump is over here on the right, and then on the front side or the suction side of your pump, you have valves. And then on the outlet part of your pump, your plumbing goes into a filter, and then out of the filter goes into the heater, and then out of the heater, you're going into either your pool or your spa. But if you notice, everything in between, there's valves, there's other components, right? So like I was talking about earlier, when I was mentioning, I asked about when the last time the filter was cleaned. As you can see from this diagram, now you can kind of picture more or less why it would be important to make sure the filter's clean. Because if that's clogged, it ain't going to let the water go past it, and it's just not going to let the pump to prime the way it's supposed to. So this diagram doesn't show a salt cell, but if you notice, there's a pipe that says pool return and spa return over on the left, but before that there's a couple of 3-port valves. You'll typically find a salt cell after this heater, but before these 3-port valves there. So like I said, that's the next thing that I like to ask is when the last time your salt system or your salt cell's been serviced. Because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, most salt systems require service or cleaning once every 5 or 6 months. Because what happens is, over a couple months, since salt systems have a high levels of calcium, these cells like to build up calcium inside them. So they need to be cleaned, because if you don't clean them often, or when they're supposed to be cleaned, they'll start to build up huge, just like rocks of calcium inside there. And that would then create restriction or a clog, kind of just like a dirty filter. So, those are the two things. And these are, at least, where I do work, and from my experience with the pools that I've worked on, majority of these pool and spa combination swimming pool equipment systems are equipped with salt cells. So that's the next thing I'm asking. Okay, so now once those items are checked off the list and they're clean, and the water levels are where they're supposed to be now, and we're still having these problems with the pump not priming, we'll go back to this diagram. Now I'm starting to kind of process of elimination here. Now I can start looking into other items, right? And since like a majority of the problems or the majority of the items that I personally look at are on the suction side, because on the suction side, if there's any leaks, and I'm talking, like I said, any pinhole leaks, things like that, these are going to be items that are not going to let the pump to prime. So whatever's on the suction side, like you can see in this diagram, you got right in front of the pump on the suction side or the intake, there's this little union right there. So that's another thing that I'm looking at, is to see, you know, inside these unions, there's gaskets, there's O-rings. So you're going to want to make sure that those are nice and tight, making a nice seal. They're not worn out. If they are, you're going to want to, you know, address those, because that's a point where if it's not creating that nice seal, you're definitely going to get some air leak or suction leaks through there. And then after that, you'll notice these, what you call 3-port valves. And again, for the new viewers and listeners out there, a 3-port valve is basically like a huge T, but with the valve on top of it that you can rotate. This allows you to divert water a certain direction. Well, and you'll probably hear the terms, you know, Jandy valves, Hayward valves, Pentair valves, 3-port valves. They're all essentially the same thing, and there's other brands that make these also, but the components are relatively the same. These valves, they also have little gaskets inside there and O-rings, and because they're used quite often, you will definitely see these wear out. It's not uncommon for them to have suction leaks through these O-rings. So this is another item that I'm looking at. After I've already checked off the filter, I've already checked out the salt system, everything's nice and clean, the water's full of, the pool's full of water. I'm looking at all the components that are on the suction side of the pump. So O-rings, check them all, gaskets, unions, make sure they're nice and hand tight. They don't got to be superhuman strength tight, just majority of unions just need to be hand tight. And as long as all those are checked, you typically should figure out this priming issue by then. Now, if you've already looked at all these items, and you're just still having problems with the pump not priming, again, as long as all the components inside the pool pump are working the way they're supposed to, then you should achieve priming by now. But if you haven't, then yeah, now you can definitely start to suspect that maybe there is an internal component inside the actual pool pump that is faulty, or just something's broken inside there, right? So here's another diagram where it's a blown up pool pump. I think I pulled it up earlier, but just in case. And again, I'm gonna try to explain it as simple as I can. So if you notice item number 12 here, that's what you call an impeller. Okay, so this impeller is connected to or attached to the motor shaft, and the motor shaft is what spins. So as the motor shaft spins, it's also spinning this impeller. Well, it is not uncommon to have a faulty impeller. And sometimes I've seen this happen many times, where the point at which the impeller attaches to the pump motor breaks. So you'll find yourself in a situation where the motor shaft is just spinning, but the impeller isn't. So essentially, it's not going to create any sort of pool water suction or water flow at all. You're just going to have a spinning motor. But if something is broken to that level, you would typically hear rattling inside there, just something clunking around. You'll usually be able to tell. So like I said, if you've already looked at all the other basics and everything checks out and you're still having issues, then looking inside the actual pump motor to see if you have broken parts or a worn out impeller, or just, you know, something of that nature, then you're definitely going to want to start to seek, you know, professional help, for professional service to come out and, you know, take a look at these components for you. And I probably wouldn't recommend you to DIY if you're not comfortable or you don't understand how these components work. But by this point, if you've already covered the basics, and you're just starting to suspect that it could be something beyond the basics that would lead you to want to open up that pump, call a local pool professional. It's going to be the best thing, because the worst thing you want to do is take that thing apart, not know how to put it back together, and just create further damage. Okay, so now, if these items have all been covered, right now, like we've covered almost everything on an above ground aspect. Okay, if you've covered all of these items and your pump is still not priming, and hopefully you don't get to this point, but sometimes it could be something beyond the basics, is something underground in between your pool and the suction side of your pump. Something in between there is the issue, right? So, I'm not going to get too much into detail for underground items, because if you're suspecting underground leaks, it like I said, kind of like similar to needing somebody to come out and look at your pump to open it up. Same thing goes for any suspicions of an underground leak. Because if you're not aware of how your plumbing system underground works, and the type of materials that are used to put your plumbing system together, you're definitely going to want to seek professional a licensed professional to look at those items underground. So again, not to get too much into detail, but one of the more common areas for potential underground leaks are items like skimmers. That's usually one of the major components that it's underground that could potentially cause an underground leak. And again, if you're a new listener, new to pools, or a new pool owner, skimmer is usually located over at your pool deck. It's got that white lid on top of the concrete deck, or whatever type of deck you have, but it's a white lid. When you open it, you look down in there, it's this huge canister. It's usually about 2 to 3 feet deep. And what that is connected to, that's connected to your suction side of your pump. So if that component is broken, for example, if the fittings that are underneath it that plumb into it, if they're worn out, or if just something's cracked, then that could be a point where you can have a suction leak. But like I said, if you're at this point, you're gonna want to seek a professional pool technician to come out and take a look, or even start calling around for underground leak detection specialists, because they have equipment, and you'd be surprised, they can pinpoint leaks really, really well. I mean, they have the equipment to listen underground, so you don't have to cut concrete if you got all concrete decking. So, seek those leak detection companies out there. Do not try to DIY this part, because like I said, if you're not familiar with all the components, you're just gonna get into a world of hurt. There's certain materials you got to use for this stuff, and certain things to look at. So that's why I don't really want to go too much into detail, because by this point, like I said, you're seeking the professionals for this part. So that's pretty much it, guys. I'm going to leave that there. And again, I hope you guys found this information helpful. And for fun, let me know if you've ever come across a pool pump that wasn't priming, and what you looked at, how you diagnosed it. Let us know what you did to fix the problem in the comments below. And with that being said, don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed this episode, and that way you can get notified on future episodes as I upload. And again, guys, I appreciate every single one of you. Thanks for the views, thanks for the comments, thanks for the support, and I'll see you guys on the next one.